It began with a ripple in the void, a tremor in the static fields that wrapped the solar system. Like a second skin, satellites blinked and stuttered across every orbit. Dark energy detectors wailed warnings that no one had heard in 3,000 years. And then the ripple became a tear, and the tear became a wound. And through that wound came ships not shaped like anything human, long black forms that shimmered like oil under a dying sun. They came in silence, and yet every signal band screamed with their presence. Every telescope, every sensor, every eye on Earth turned upward as the ancient terror arrived. No one alive remembered the Yvkai, not truly, not the way people remember a neighbor or a lover, but the memory of them was etched into the bones of the world, into the ruins beneath the oldest cities, and the orbital scars hidden beneath the regrown forests of Europe, into the whispered bedtime stories where monsters came from the stars and took without mercy and disappeared just as suddenly as they came back, when Earth was still soft and scattered and scared. The sky burned with ghost fire as the fleet emerged, hundreds, maybe thousands of ships, each a leviathan, each older than any human kingdom, each humming with technologies that once cracked worlds apart. The Yvkai broadcast one message across all systems, one phrase in every language: we have returned, and your submission is expected. But Earth did not answer, not right away. There was no panic, no riots, no screaming into the void like the last time. There was only silence, a long ancient silence, thick as stone. And in that silence, the world turned its face upward, not in fear, but in something stranger, something sharper. It was not arrogance, it was not defiance, it was something colder, a smirk, a knowing that ran deeper than blood. The Yvkai descended with rituals and declarations, expecting fear, expecting scrambling nations, and desperate attempts at diplomacy. They remembered a species fractured into warring tribes, into soft governments with sharp tongues and dull weapons. They remembered Earth as it was and not as it had become. The first warning was subtle. The edge of their fleet brushed the heliopause, and a dozen ships simply vanished. No explosions, no signals, no debris, just nothing, just gone, as if reality had swallowed them whole, as if the solar system itself had decided they were unwelcome. The fleet hesitated, recalibrated, sent scouts in patterns designed to avoid ancient minefields or hidden weapons, but there was nothing to detect, and more scouts vanished each time without trace. On Earth, the response finally came, not from a government, not from a general, not even from a council, but from a child, a girl no older than 10, who looked into the sky with augmented eyes and laughed and said, "The monsters are back, they are really back." And her mother only smiled and said, "Let them come, darling, we are not afraid anymore." From Mars to Europa, from the Dyson rings to the quantum cores beneath the Pacific, Earth was not preparing for war. Earth had already won a war the Yvkai had forgotten to remember. Above the Earth, far beyond the reach of clouds and weather and memory, the citadel turned slowly, a black ring against the velvet sky, silent from the outside, alive within. It was not built for beauty, but for function, a relic grown into its place over thousands of years, a meeting place for the minds that spoke for humanity, not with titles or crowns, but with understanding, with weight behind their words and fire behind their thoughts. They were 12, not because 12 was sacred, but because 12 could disagree without dissolving, 12 could balance power without tipping into chaos. They sat around a table that was not a table, not truly, a shifting surface of light and logic that pulsed with data from every corner of the system. And beyond solar activity, fleet readiness, agricultural yield, ambient emotional resonance across major cities, all of it streamed before them, and none of it caused concern, not even the incoming threat. The oldest of them, a woman whose body had long since been replaced cell by cell, thought by thought, with machines of her own design, raised one hand to signal calm. She spoke softly, and the room listened. She said, "The Yvkai have returned," and no one in the chamber flinched. Not one expression changed. The word itself carried no weight. Not anymore, not here. They reviewed the footage, the arrival, the losses, the ships that vanished like dust in sunlight, the strange gravitational harmonics detected near Neptune, where space itself seemed to tremble in protest. And still no one panicked, not the general whose eyes held centuries of conflict, not the philosopher who had walked on Titan before it bloomed, not the bioengineer who once redesigned a virus mid-outbreak using nothing but a stylus and a glass of wine. The diplomat with gold woven through their skin leaned forward, voice calm like a still sea, and asked, do they remember what they left behind? And another answered, they remember what they did not, what we became. Outside the citadel, the defense grid did not rise, it was already there, invisible, folded into the structure of reality itself. Humanity did not build walls, it reshaped space. It did not aim weapons, it made gravity itself bend in service of protection. The fleet did not scramble to intercept, it hovered patient, coiled with power and ancient codes that no longer needed activation. They waited because they had already won. The youngest among them, a child in form, but not in mind, born from a culture where thought was passed in fractals rather than words, spoke at last, her voice chiming through the chamber like crystal against steel. She said, they come expecting fear, expecting obedience. They do not know they are entering the house of fire. There was no vote, there was no speech, they simply stood, and in doing so the decision was made. Earth would receive the emissaries, not as subjects, not as equals, but as witnesses to what humanity had become, and perhaps, if the stars aligned, as survivors. And somewhere across the void far beyond Mars, a small signal pinged once and vanished, and across the vast quiet Earth just smirked. They thought it was a bluff made of silence and confidence of an old race trying to posture in the face of superior might, because to the Yvkai superiority had always been measured in weapons in mass, in the number of systems crushed underfoot and banners raised in flame. And so they did what conquerors do, they sent a spear fleet fast and armored with intent to crack open Earth's sky like an egg, to show that the old empire had returned and that resistance was still pointless. The spear fleet cut through the void at half the speed of light, riding fields of bent space, with weapons primed and ready to burn cities, and fracture moons ready to remind the humans of the order of things and the mistake of arrogance. They came in formation, perfect and proud. They came with ancient war songs encoded into their hulls and psychic screams of domination that once shattered empires. But Earth did not respond. No fleets launched to meet them, no warnings echoed from its moons, just the quiet, just the watching. Then one by one the ships began to die. There was no flash, no explosion, no dramatic surge of force, just silence. Each ship entered a zone just beyond the orbit of Saturn and simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not erased, just gone. The data feeds ended in the middle of a transmission, not a single distress call made it out, no remnants, no radiation trails, no escape pods, just silence and the echo of nothing. Panic bloomed across the command mind of the Yvkai fleet. A vast consciousness stretched between ships and commanders, bound by protocols older than Earth's written language. The mind demanded answers. The mind could not process absence. The mind had never seen death like this, not caused by force or entropy, but by rejection, as if the universe itself had turned its face away and refused their presence. Desperation followed. They launched probes, smaller, faster, harder to track, and every single one vanished as well, not with fire, but with stillness, the kind of stillness that suffocates, the kind that implies something watching, something listening, something waiting. They changed course, recalculated trajectories, ordered the remaining ships to hold position while they scanned for mines, for stealth ships, for quantum traps, but they found nothing except a singularity of probability wrapped around the solar system, like a boundary, not physical, not logical, a line drawn in the fabric of space that whispered, you do not belong here. Back on their home carrier, the overseer of the vanguard stood before the mind core and voiced what none dared say. Perhaps Earth had changed, perhaps the long peace was not peace, but incubation. Perhaps the prey they once hunted had become something else, something unknowable. Then came the signal from Earth. It was not a warning, not a demand, just a single image of an old map of the stars marked with ancient battles and fallen empires, and a single phrase burned into the background in every Yvkai dialect and every human tongue. You are trespassing in posthuman territory. And somewhere deep in the heart of the fleet, an instinct older than thought awoke, and it whispered, run. They requested a meeting, and Earth said yes. Not with hesitation, not with urgency, but with the cool precision of a predator, observing an animal that had wandered back into its hunting ground, unaware of how much the terrain had changed. They sent an emissary, a being carved from command flesh and memory, a veteran of countless starfalls, one who had been born in the fires of conquest and carried the weight of ancient victories in every breath. They thought they would walk into a room and see stone walls and fearful eyes. They expected resistance or reverence, or pleading. They found none. They were brought not to a city, not to a throne room, but to the forge, a construct that defied scale and comprehension, a place not built but grown over millennia from neural matter and living metal orbiting Saturn like a second moon, layered in defenses so subtle they hummed with elegance and terror. It pulsed with thought, it breathed with memory, and as they entered it reached toward them, not with hostility, but with curiosity, like a dream remembering itself. The emissary stepped into the central chamber and saw no walls, only endless fractals shifting with data. No lights, yet everything was lit. No beings, yet someone was there. And she was watching. She stood alone at the center of it, all barefoot, her skin marked with constellations, her eyes reflecting stars that no longer existed. She smiled, not warmly, not coldly, but knowingly, and the Yvkai felt for the first time in centuries that they might not be the highest form in the room. She spoke, and her voice was made of layered frequencies, mathematical truth and emotional tone overlapping in a harmony that bent the air. She said, "Welcome to the Forge, repository of everything humanity has seen, built, broken, rebuilt, forgotten, remembered, transcended. Here we hold the songs of dying suns and the screams of newborn galaxies. Here we keep the ghosts of what we were and the seeds of what we will become." The emissary demanded explanation, demanded understanding. What is this place? What happened to the earth? We knew. Who are you? And why do you not fear us? And the woman just smiled and gestured, and the walls lit with stories told in flashes and sensations and memories, not bound to time. They saw wars fought in seconds, where entire civilizations lived and died in simulated epochs within a single breath. They saw humanity reach into black holes and pull secrets from singularities like pearls from the deep. They saw minds that had left bodies behind, walking as patterns of light across interstellar bandwidths, and children who shaped reality with language alone. The Yvkai saw machines praying and stars singing and timelines folded into art, and in every memory humanity was there, not at the edge, not at the mercy, but at the center, changing everything, adapting, learning, rising, falling, and rising again. The woman stepped closer, and the forge rippled with her presence. She said, "You came back with fire and threats and old empire dust on your hands. But we do not deal in war anymore. We deal in consequence, and you have trespassed into something you cannot yet measure." And for the first time the emissary was afraid, not of pain, not of death, but of the unknown behind the eyes of a species that had stopped fighting because it no longer needed to. They were shown not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with intent, with clarity, as if the human standing before them believed understanding was a gift and ignorance was the only true violence. The forge unfolded like a blooming mind, layer after layer, memory after memory, history unspooled, not in lines, but in spirals cascading through the air, wrapping around the Yvkai emissary, who stood still and silent as entire centuries pressed into their senses. They saw the earth not as it once was, not as they remembered it, small and fractured, bleeding beneath orbital bombardment and divided by hunger, but as it had become, a singular voice singing in countless tones, a cradle of endless minds working in harmony and friction and evolution. Cities grown, not built, thoughts exchanged, not spoken, humans who dreamed in equations and loved in symphonies and died only when they chose to. They saw the seas turn to light farms of plankton engineered to feed trillions, the deserts humming with solar lattices, the mountains hollowed and filled with symbiotic reactors, the very crust of the planet pulsing with quantum threads, where information flowed like blood. They saw the skies layered in transparent satellites, each one carrying fragments of sentient code that whispered to the stars and listened back. On Mars they saw the red sands turned green with forests genetically designed to thrive in vacuum, trees that sang to one another in chemical chords, and roots that burrowed deep into regolith laced with artificial bacteria that melted stone into soil. They saw cities carved into canyons, homes built for bodies and minds that no longer looked entirely human, yet carried the spark of earth in every gesture. They were shown Titan, where oceans boiled with potential creatures born in methane, but raised with curiosity colonies of thinkers who lived inside geometric machines, drifting on cryo winds, whispering philosophies older than time to one another, in harmonics that bent space. They were shown the core, the true heart of Earth, not the molten iron, but the orbital mind spanning the planet in 9 layers of thought, each one reflecting a different path of humanity, one for emotion, one for logic, one for creation, one for memory, one for war, though that one slept now, wrapped in stillness, since the last conflict ended, and the rest pulsed in rhythm, with the forge guiding the species, not ruling it, growing it like a forest. And then the Yvkai emissary was shown something else, not data, not progress, but choice. The humans had chosen this path. They had been given the power to conquer the stars, to crush and dominate. And instead, they had turned inward, not with cowardice, but with patience. They had not reached outward, not because they could not, but because they did not need to. The galaxy was vast and filled with noise, and so humanity chose to become signal. The woman turned to the emissary, her eyes calm, her voice soft. We are not what you feared, we are what you forgot could exist, a species not lost in its own rage, not broken by its past. We remembered, and we built, and we waited. The emissary said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The silence between them stretched long. It was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of understanding. Something deep and unspoken settled in the air, a weight that pressed against the Yvkai, like a planet's gravity, something they could not escape, not with their ships, not with their minds, not with their weapons. The emissary stood there alone amidst the glow of the forge, unable to comprehend what had just unfolded, what they had just witnessed. Their mind recoiling from the enormity of it all, the weight of humanity, not in the way they once saw it, not as a thing to be crushed underfoot, not as prey, but as something vast, as a nebula, something alive that could grow, expand, shape itself across the stars without needing a single war to fuel it. The emissary's thoughts fractured. They wanted to ask more, to demand answers, to pull at the threads of this strange new reality. But they couldn't speak, they could only feel the impossible nature of it, their ancient instinct as conqueror and lord trembling at the very thought that they were the ones who had entered a trap, one set not with claws, but with time and patience, and the weight of something long endured. And then the woman smiled again, not with malice, but with something more dangerous, something old and knowing. She stepped back, and the forge rippled in response. She lifted a hand, and the space around her bent, not with power, but with presence. It wasn't a display, it wasn't an attack, it was simply the truth of being that wrapped the Yvkai in waves of understanding. They were nothing here, nothing at all. She turned to the side, and raised her voice just loud enough for the silent emptiness of space to hear her words. She said to the emissary, "We waited because we knew this moment would come. You thought you returned to conquer, but you returned to witness. And we have allowed you to see us, we have allowed you to touch the edges of what we have become. And now you will leave knowing this. The stars are not yours anymore. The galaxy does not belong to empires that built with blood and fire. It belongs to those who can shape it without lifting a hand to strike. And when you return home, you will remember this moment. You will feel it in every corner of your mind, in every transmission you send, in every star you cross. You will feel what you could never take and never break." And then, with a flick of her wrist, the forge folded into itself, pulling the presence of humanity away from the Yvkai, leaving nothing but the cold silence of space. Once more the emissary stood there alone, with nothing to grasp, nothing to hold on to. Their mind filled with the image of humanity, not as it was, but as it had become, something too large, too subtle to fight against, a force that didn't need to be feared, but simply understood. They returned to their fleet, but when they tried to speak to their commanders, their voices faltered as though they had lost something they could never regain. Not a battle, not a fleet, but a certainty, a belief that they had understood the universe, and then Earth had shown them how little they truly knew. And somewhere deep inside the heart of Earth, across its vast and quiet cities, a single human smiled just slightly, the smirk of one who knows the truth that the galaxy had never truly been theirs to conquer.